On 5th of December 1945, a formation of US Navy Grumman Avenger torpedo bombers on a training mission out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, went missing. This is an enduring mystery, but the explanation lies not in the paranormal or the geophysical properties of the Bermuda Triangle, but in the complexities of the human mind and how apparently rational people can lose the plot and allow themselves to be led to disaster. To explain what happened to Flight 19, we can take the various radio transcripts and testimonies from the Board of Investigation to create a timeline of events and a plot of the headings and timings. This will describe a sequence of events from takeoff at Fort Lauderdale via the bombing range at Hen and Chicken Shoals to the only radio direction finding fix, and then to fuel exhaustion. The flying conditions were described as average but undesirable in the showers and in the gusty conditions during takeoff and landing. The weather was about 8 to 12 miles visibility with broken cloud at 3,000 feet and 2 miles visibility with a 1,500 feet cloud base in the showers. The wind at height was quite strong from the southwest. It was forecast as 241 degrees 31 knots at 1,000 feet and 240 degrees 36 knots at 3,000 feet. The sea state was described as rough. The task given to Flight 19 was a dead reckoning navigation exercise known as Navigation Problem Number 1, which was given in tabular form, starting with a latitude and longitude fix, which corresponded with Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station, and then 4 tracks as shown here. In 1945, the magnetic variation in the Florida area was about 0, so that true north and magnetic north were about the same. The flying time for this route at the Avenger's cruising speed of 187 knots and with the forecast wind was 1 hour 44 minutes, with an additional 20 minutes allowed for the bombing exercise. The route was to be flown at an altitude of 700 to 1,000 feet. The first 2 tracks are the same direction, so they form the first side of the triangle, and the midpoint of this side was the location of the bombing range at Hen and Chicken Shoals, position 2 on the chart. The significance of this is connected to the fact that the flight instructor, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, was observed walking out to his aircraft without his plotting board. The plotting board, along with a circular slide rule, enabled the pilot navigator to calculate headings and timings to return to the aircraft carrier using the forecast wind and the ship's course and speed. Without the plotting board, Taylor would be relying on his memory and a mental picture of the route. The Board of Investigation thought this detail was insignificant, thinking that the plotting board might already be on the aircraft. In any event, the route information was correctly displayed on the blackboard in the briefing room when it was examined by the training staff after the event. The route is shown here with coastlines and islands, but this topographical information was not depicted on the plotting board, which was a purely dead reckoning device. Map reading is an additional skill, but is irrelevant to flight over the open ocean, where there are no ground features. Taylor was late reporting for the flight, and they eventually took off at 14:08, forming up on the student flight leader, probably Captain Powers, US Marine Corps, with Taylor call sign FD28 in a shadowing position and setting course at 14:10. All times are local. With the tailwind, the first leg was quick, only 16 minutes, and they arrived at the bombing range at 14:26, position 2. Although 20 minutes was allowed for the bombing exercise, they were still there at 1500 when one of the student pilots was heard on the radio asking for permission to drop his last practice bomb. If they set course on the second part of the first leg later than planned at 1505, they would arrive at the first turning point, position 3, at 1524, and estimating the second turning point, position 4, at 1547. At around 1540, Flight 19 was not in two-way communication with Fort Lauderdale, but the radio messages between Taylor and the other pilots of Flight 19 were overheard by Lieutenant Cox, call sign FT-74, who was airborne over Fort Lauderdale leading another flight. "Don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn." Cox called them. "This is FT-74. Plane or boat calling powers, identify yourself so that someone can help you." Taylor replied, "Both my compasses are out and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm over land, but it is broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down, and I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale." Cox said, "Put the sun and the strip of islands on your port hand and you will be heading north. By doing this, you should be able to reach the mainland. Continue flying north after you have passed over Miami, as NAS Lauderdale is 20 miles north of Miami." Taylor answered, "Can you have Miami or someone turn on their radar gear and pick us up? We don't seem to be getting far. We were out on a navigation hop, and on the second leg I thought they were going wrong and took over and was flying them back to the right position, but I am sure now that neither one of my compasses are working." Cox asked Taylor for his altitude. Taylor replied 2,300 feet. Later he reported at 3,500 feet, well above or between the clouds. They could not be picked up on radar. During the bombing exercise, Taylor would have been circling overhead. When circling, a magnetic compass spins erratically due to acceleration errors and does not settle down onto a steady heading until the aircraft has been flying straight for a few seconds. The directional gyro synchronized with the compass gives a steadier heading, but even it will give uneven readings during quick turns and over time will drift off due to gyroscopic precession. It needs to be checked periodically against the magnetic compass in straight flight. These effects are well known to experienced pilots, so why did he think his compasses were wrong? After the bombing exercise, the second part of the first leg to the east was a continuation of track 091. As he rolled out of his holding pattern and flew behind the student flight leader, did Taylor get the uneasy feeling that they should be heading north? Or, with the December sun behind him, if he thought they were already heading north, did he begin to doubt his compasses, which were correctly showing east? Notice that the original estimate for position 3 was 1505, but they did not set course from position 2 until that time. Cox heard Taylor say that he took over on the second leg. Without his plotting board, Taylor would not know the time for his turning points. It seems likely that Taylor took over after the student flight leader had made the northbound turn at position 3. However, if Taylor thought they were already flying north before the turn, he may have mistaken this left turn as the turn onto the southwesterly heading, which would take them back to base. If he had somehow got mixed up as to which leg of the flight he was on, after the turn he may have thought that he was on the third and final leg of the flight towards the southwest. However, he was most probably still on the second leg with both of his compasses reading northwest, heading about 337, and so he thought his compasses were wrong. At about 1545, Flight 19 was at the north end of the second track near to Great Sail Cay. Having been airborne for about 1 hour 35 minutes, Taylor may have had the feeling that they were further along their course and close to the end point back at Fort Lauderdale. According to the weather forecast, the upper cloud was increasing towards the evening and obscuring the sun, removing that source of orientation. Having taken the lead, Taylor should not be looking for Fort Lauderdale. He should be watching his timing and preparing to turn onto the third and final track, which would take him to Fort Lauderdale. But Taylor seemed to have lost track of time and direction. It is known that none of the aircraft in the flight had chronometers, but it was assumed that all of the pilots would have their Navy issue wristwatch. So, did Taylor have a timepiece, or did he forget that too? Having overflown Grand Bahama and the turning point at Grey Sail Cay, and having glimpsed land and islands between the clouds, Taylor thought he had overflown South Florida and was over the Florida Keys. He had previously been based at Miami, so that his mental picture of the situation may have been biased in that direction. At this point, Cox should have told Taylor that he cannot be over the Keys and to fly west, which was the standard advice issued to pilots flying in the training area east of Florida. Instead, Cox compounded Taylor's delusion by telling him to fly north. If Taylor thought he had passed the south tip of Florida and was over the Florida Keys, and disregarding his compass, he would turn left, thinking to follow the Keys back to the mainland. In reality, and still disregarding his compasses, a left turn to follow the Ks of the Little Bahamas Bank would take him to the northwest of Grand Bahama. The Ks are oriented approximately 120 true and 300 true. At 1610, position 5, Taylor said, "We are south of Florida, west of the Keys." After about 23 minutes flying northwest, they had run out of islands to follow and they must have turned back along the Ks, heading about 120. At 1628, as they flew southeast, the Air Sea Rescue Organization, call sign ASR-4, called them. "Suggest you have another plane in your flight with a good compass take over the lead and guide you back over the mainland." Taylor replied at 1631, position 6. "One of the other planes in the flight thinks if we head 270 we could hit land." In testimony, Cox said that at about 1640, position 7, he heard Taylor say, "We got lost after flying 120. For an hour, Taylor must have flown up and down the Bahama Cays until 1645, position 8, when he announced the flight will fly 030 degrees for 30 or maybe 45 minutes. The various radio transcripts are inconsistent, but either way they flew northeast for only about 22 minutes before the next turn at 1707. Meanwhile, Cox was flying south to the Keys to look for Taylor. As they flew apart, they lost radio contact, and Cox finally realized that Taylor must be going north over the Bahama Cays and reported this to Fort Lauderdale. "FT-74, my position about 40 miles south of Fort Lauderdale, transmissions fading, therefore FT-28 must be going north over Bimini's or Bahamas." At about 1700, position 9, the students of Flight 19 were again questioning Taylor's route. Lieutenant Commander Donald J. Poole from Flight Training Fort Lauderdale testified that at about 1700 he heard on the radio two of Flight 19 students remonstrating, "Damn it, if we would just fly west we would get home." But at about 1707, Taylor radioed that they would fly east for 10 minutes, position 10. At 1715, position 11, Taylor was heard again. "FT-28, I receive you very weak. We are now flying 270. Then at 1717, he is still flying west. And again at 1719, "This is FT-28. I am flying 270 degrees until I reach field or run out of gas. Planes fly close formation. When one plane drops to 10 gallons of gas, all planes will land together." Sunset was at 1728. All the while, the Search and Rescue Organization was trying to get a radio direction finding fix, but the signals were weak, with interference on the frequency. Finally, at 1750, there was enough information for Search and Rescue to issue a fix at position 29 north, 79 west, but it was vague, with a circle of uncertainty of 100 miles radius. They never broadcasted this information to Flight 19, as they thought Flight 19 was heading west. Nevertheless, 2 PBM Mariner flying boats were dispatched from Banana River Naval Air Station to search the area and contact Flight 19. According to our plot, at 1750, Flight 19 was within about 25 miles of the 29 north, 79 west fix, still heading west, position 12. Taylor refused to change to the emergency frequency. At 17:55, I cannot change frequency, I have to keep my planes intact. And at 18:02, we may have to ditch any minute. And 2 minutes later, negative, what course are we on? We are over the Gulf, we didn't go far enough east. How long have we been on course? Suggest we fly due east until we run out of fuel. We have a better chance of being picked up. At 18:04, Flight 19 had been going west for about an hour with a strong headwind, and with nothing in sight they must have been in despair. But they were probably only about 60 miles off the coast, position 13. But Taylor turned the flight east again. If instead they had kept going west, they would have made it to the Florida coast. At 18:17, the final call from Flight 19 was heard. FT28. What course are we on? Affirmative. I'm pretty sure we are over the Gulf. We didn't go far enough east. Suggest we fly due east until we run out of fuel. We have a better chance of being picked up. When first man gets down to 10 gallons of gas, we will all land in the water together. Does everyone understand that? At about 18:22, they were out of gas and facing a difficult night ditching in rough seas. They were then about 130 miles east of Florida, position 14. A longer flight time was possible if they had earlier slowed down to maximum endurance airspeed, but I assume they continued at cruising speed for maximum range. 1950, a ship reported seeing an explosion. One of the Mariner flying boats, which had been dispatched to the fix to search for Flight 19, had blown up. The search went on for 5 days. Scores of aircraft were used, but other than an oil slick, no trace was found of Flight 19 or the missing PBM. These charts showing the search areas for each day are based on those published in the Board of Investigation report. The Gulf Stream current sets to the northeast at about 4 knots, so in 12 hours the survivors would drift 48 nautical miles, or 96 nautical miles per day. Knowing the fix, the current and the wind, the initial search area specified by the Air Sea Rescue Organisation was spot on. But night had fallen and the loss of the PBM disrupted the overnight search effort. The best chance of finding the downed airman was during the daytime of the following day, the 6th. However, the extensive resources were spread over a huge area, reflecting the utter confusion in the search and rescue organisation. With hindsight, it's easy to criticize the search effort and wonder why they did not concentrate their resources northeast of the direction-finding fix. But the fix was extremely imprecise because of the poor quality of the individual bearings. Clearly they had no idea where Flight 19 had gone and were searching the whole of the training area east of Florida, as well as west of Florida and individual reports over the mainland. What conclusions can we draw from these events? Taylor had asked to be relieved from the mission but had been declined. He had asked to be relieved from previous assignments, so his heart was not in it. On the day he was late and forgetful, so his mind was not on the job either. If he was distracted and thinking about other things during the flight, his mental picture of the route, and in particular the timing, would be disrupted. Against that was the stress of overseeing the flight and not wanting to show weakness or confusion. He asked for help from the higher power, the radar, but he would not allow the student flight leader to resume the lead. That said, flying in formation is a demanding task and possibly precluded the other pilots from maintaining a dead reckoning plot, that being the responsibility of the leader. When Taylor became confused as to the direction he was flying, he decided his compasses were faulty. He could have confirmed his heading by reference to the compasses in the other aircraft. Instead, he fell into the process of confirmation bias, in which he looked for information which confirmed his delusion instead of determining the real situation by a rational analysis of the available facts. So, when he saw land through the gaps in the cloud, he concluded they were over the Florida Keys. Without a topographical chart, he had no information as to which other islands he could be flying over. He then appeared to forget the imaginary problem with his compasses and set off northward looking for the missing Florida mainland. Judging by their remonstrations, the other members of the flight knew they had to fly west, but they were subject to military discipline and were reluctant to question the leadership of the flight instructor until he turned them east at about 1700. Even then, they did not disobey his orders. Taylor eventually turned the flight westward, and the rest of the Flight 19 must have relaxed, thinking the crisis would soon be over. However, after an hour of flying west into a stiff headwind and still no sight of land, they must have been quite demoralized and disoriented. Taylor was still confused, thinking they must be over the Gulf, and determined to fly east again, even though they would be retracing their track over open water. Finally, Taylor appealed to their survival instinct to stay in formation for the ditching. The total distance flown was approximately 800 miles in 4 hours and 12 minutes. So Flight 19 did not disappear without a trace. They left a trail of clues in the radio messages to within 5 minutes of ditching. But it was dark, the sea state was rough, and the current and the wind took them away to oblivion. As they say, aviation is not inherently dangerous, but is unforgiving of carelessness and mistakes.